Hello friends, Steve Stockton here. In this episode, we're going to take a look at some bizarre disappearances from hospitals. Join me. Let's walk and see. First up, we have the story of Joan Gay Croft. On April 9, 1947, the deadliest tornado ever to hit Oklahoma went raging through parts of the state. A monstrous and deadly Class F5 was a maelstrom of wind and debris, and it ripped through parts of Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. At some point, it blew a path through the town of Woodward, Oklahoma, leaving in its wake chaos, destruction, tragedy, and death. In the end, 185 people were deceased, 1,000 more were injured, and it was the beginning of one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in Oklahoma's history. Although many people tragically lost their lives to the whirling cyclone of death, there were many, many more who were spared. One of those who was lucky enough to have escaped death's clutches was a 4-year-old named Joan Gay Croft. Joan's mother had been killed in the natural disaster, and her stepfather had been critically injured, but Joan herself had come away from the brush with death with a non-life-threatening injury in the form of a piece of wood that penetrated her leg. She was found and rushed to the hospital for treatment, along with her sister, Jerry, who had also suffered non-life-threatening injuries. There was obviously a huge influx of seriously injured people, some on the brink of death due to the storm. And so the girls were quickly and easily treated and then relegated to the basement of the overcrowded hospital, as it had been transformed into a shelter where many refugees from the tornado were being housed and treated. They were there for a night, and things were chaotic and sad, but they got through it together. The next day, 2 men in what were described as khaki army uniforms went into the hospital and made their way down to the basement. They went straight for Joan and tried escorting her out of the basement in front of everyone else, which by now was at least a few hundred people, despite the little girl's loud protests and screaming. They knew who she was because when they first entered the basement, they'd asked a member of the overworked and overtired staff who she was, asked for her by name, specifically, and the staff member pointed her out. They didn't seem to be interested in anyone but the 4-year-old girl. Joan screamed and cried, pleading with the men not to make her leave her sister, and the men patiently comforted her, telling her that they were friends and that she would be back there in just a few hours to collect Jerry so they could be brought to wherever they were going together. The hospital staff realized what was going on after seeing the commotion and tried their best to intervene, and as they did, the men were very calm and composed, seemingly very professional, and they then explained that they were merely taking the girls, Joan first and then Jerry, to another hospital where the girls' relatives were waiting for them. Somehow, the men were allowed to leave with the little girl, as apparently that explanation was deemed good enough for whoever was in charge. But no one ever returned with Joan, and she was never seen or heard from again. Nobody ever saw the 2 men again either. Eventually, it was discovered that Joan had vanished and had more than likely been abducted. And when that happened, a major manhunt was launched for her, but it turned up almost nothing at all. In fact, her kidnappers have never been identified, and no trace of them or Joan has ever been found. The case gained international coverage, which meant it was a big deal at the time, a time when most cases didn't get much further than the local media and news. And in the years to come, it spawned many anniversary articles asking what could have happened to the little girl and who her alleged abductors were. On May 22, 1993, the case was covered on the show Unsolved Mysteries, and it featured a full dramatic reenactment of the whole bizarre event. Interestingly enough, many women have come forward throughout the years claiming to be the adult Joan Gay Croft, but those leads have never gone anywhere, and all the women have been ruled out either genetically or by some other means. In 1999, a woman came forward to the editor of the newspaper, The Oklahoman, claiming to be Joan, but she then ceased all communication after the initial contact and failed to show up for the planned meeting with the editor. This happened again with a woman living in Canada, and obviously no one knows whether or not either of those women would have been the long-lost little girl. Despite dozens of women throughout the decades who claim to be the little girl, none of them have ever proven to be, and that leaves us with nothing but theories to go on, as Joan Gay Croft is still listed as a missing person. Most people believe she was kidnapped, due to obvious reasons, but that doesn't explain the series of bizarre events that happened leading up to the alleged abduction. Who were the men? How did they know about Joan, who she was, and where she was? Why were they specifically looking for her out of the dozens of other kids who had been orphaned or at least stranded in the shelter due to the devastation of the tornado? And why not take her sister too? They knew her name, and so they must have known at least of her, but what did they want and how were they able to publicly take her yet leave behind no clues or traces and never be seen again? For their part, Joan's family believes that some other family lost their daughter in the disaster and wanted to replace her with Joan. But, just like everything else, there's never been any proof to that theory. Simply put, no one knows what happened to Joan Gay Croft, and more than likely, no one ever will. Next up, we have Jerry Irwin. Another strange vanishing that has more than just a little bizarre and unexplained element to it is the disappearance of Private First Class Jerry Irwin. On March 2, 1959, Jerry woke up in a hospital in Cedar City, Utah, with no memory of how he ended up there in the first place. He had reportedly been unconscious for 23 hours, during which time he had been talking in his sleep and saying something about the jacket on the brush. When he came to, he asked the hospital staff if there were any survivors, but no one knew what he meant by that. Survivors of what? No one knew, including Jerry himself. Finally, though, he became lucid enough to tell his story, and it seemed like his memory was coming back to him. He told the staff that he had just been off on a leave of absence and on his way home from Napa, Idaho, going to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, where he was stationed. He said he was a technician for Nike Air Missiles and that after he had reached Cedar City, he had been driving along Route 14 when he looked up and saw what he described as a strange, pulsating object in the sky. He pulled over and got out of his car to try and get a closer look at what he was seeing, and he thought that at first it was a large airplane coming in for a possible emergency landing. Jerry then wrote a note which he put on his car windshield that said, "Have gone to investigate possible plane crash. Please call law enforcement officers." He also scrawled the word "stop" on the side of his vehicle to try and get whoever was passing by to stop and read the note, thereby calling attention to it and alerting the authorities about it. He simply scrawled the word "stop" in shoe polish and then walked off to investigate the strange sight in the sky. A fish and game inspector came along and found the note sometime later, and after alerting the sheriff's office, a search party was launched both for Jerry and for the alleged plane crash he claimed to have gone to investigate. When he was brought to the hospital, no one could understand why he was completely out cold and unable to be woken up by any of the usual means, and there also seemed to be nothing physically wrong with him either. When he did finally wake up, he claimed that his jacket was missing, but that he otherwise felt perfectly normal, if not a little tired and confused. He was then transferred to William Beaumont Hospital at Fort Bliss, so that there he could be observed for 4 days, and after that he was put back on duty and into circulation. Not too long after continuing his duties, Jerry began suffering random fainting spells while on duty, and, fearing for his health, his superiors at the base made him go and get evaluated again at the hospital. He fainted again, and when he woke up at the hospital, he was said to have been in a similar state to when he had first been there a few weeks earlier. He woke up suddenly, panicked, and once again started asking the hospital staff if there had been any survivors. It seemed like he was having some sort of flashback, and when he woke up that time, he thought he had been waking up originally, meaning Jerry Irwin was completely unaware that any time had passed at all between when he left the note on his car and woke up. He didn't know he had been on duty for all those weeks, or that he had been fainting. He had no memory at all of the previous weeks, and in his mind, he had only just gone to investigate a possible plane crash. He was kept at the hospital for a full month for observation, and was then once again released back on base into active duty. The very next day, he suddenly left base without permission and got on a bus to El Paso, stopping at Cedar City and disembarking. He then headed directly to where he had originally parked his car on the side of the road, and to the same area where he had originally been investigating what he thought was a possible plane crash. He apparently found his jacket, and inside one of the pockets was a pencil shoved inside of a buttonhole with a piece of paper entwined around it. Jerry purportedly burned the paper, but then came out of whatever trance he was seemingly in and returned to the road. He was picked up there by the local sheriff. The sheriff told Jerry what had happened to him, but he had no recollection at all of leaving the base or as to why he had traveled back to that very spot. He also had no idea what was on the paper that he burned or why he had burned it in the first place. Jerry Irwin was subjected to another extensive psychological evaluation, but when no further answers could be found, a deeper analysis was ordered. He was once again put into Beaumont Hospital for tests and additional evaluation, but then he was almost immediately released again. As soon as he was released, he once again went AWOL without any warning, and he hasn't been seen or heard from since. So, what happened to Jerry Irwin? And why was he seemingly so obsessed with that particular location on the side of the road? Why had he gone back there? What happened to him initially that made it so he was so knocked out that even the usual methods of waking someone up from a stupor proved useless when used on him? How and why had he been so entranced that he had no memory of returning to that spot or why he had burned that piece of paper? If he was tranced or knocked out, or both, then by whom and why? There are so many questions here, but with no answers. It's impossible to understand mostly anything about this case and what happened to Jerry himself after he went missing again. Why was he continuously released from the hospital? And if it was really because nothing could be found to be wrong with him, then what was going on with him? One of the main questions is how did he end up at that hospital in the first place? But again, we'll probably never know, and there's been no new information about this case, though conspiracies and rumors run rampant around it still to this day. Jerry Irwin is still listed as a missing person. Next, Bonita Chamberlain. On February 13, 1978, a young mother-to-be named Bonita Chamberlain, who was only 24 years old, arrived at the Sacred Heart General Hospital in Eugene, Oregon, seemingly in labor and ready to give birth to her baby girl. Bonita had gone into labor 5 weeks early, and the premature infant was immediately put into intensive care as she fought for her life for a week. Bonita dealt with it wonderfully, by all accounts, and when she went back to the hospital to visit her little girl, after having been released herself a few days earlier, she was told that her daughter was doing great and was becoming very strong and healthy. In fact, the baby girl was doing so well that the hospital surprised Bonita by telling her she would be able to take her daughter home that afternoon. Bonita was incredibly excited and relieved, and she immediately went and called a friend to tell them the good news. That was the last time anyone ever heard from her. When she didn't return home that night, she was reported as missing, and the authorities launched a search. Her car was quickly found, and it seemingly had been abandoned at a nearby bottling factory, and it didn't take long for them to find her purse, which had been discarded in the parking lot of the University of Oregon. The last time anyone saw her, she was driving out of the parking lot of the hospital after being given the good news about her daughter. Her newborn daughter and Bonita's 2 oldest daughters were all left behind with no answers and without their mother. Authorities thought they solved the mystery a week later when they made a gruesome discovery. They found the remains of a murdered woman stuffed into a plastic bag and then dumped into a garbage bin. However, it turned out to be someone different and had nothing to do with Bonita. So what happened to Bonita Chamberlain? It's still a mystery to this day, and she is still considered a missing person. Next, Tavish Sutton. An equally strange disappearance happened on March 6, 1993, when a 1-month-old baby named Tavish Sutton was admitted to the Hugh Spalding Pediatric Unit of Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. Tavish had been admitted in order to have an abscess removed, and after a routine minor surgery, he was sent into a semi-private room to recuperate and rest. Because his mother was being treated for psychiatric problems at a mental institution at the time, Tavish was released back into the custody of the Department of Child and Family Services, as he had been living with a foster family since he was released from the hospital after being born. His biological mother didn't even know her new baby was having surgery or that he had been admitted into the hospital that day. 3 days after that surgery, Tavish Sutton would vanish without a trace. In the early morning hours, around 6:45 a.m. on March 6, 1993, a nurse checked on him and found him to be doing well. She returned to the room 15 minutes later, and the baby was simply gone. A thorough search of the hospital and the surrounding area turned up nothing at all, and the nurse was the only one who had entered or left the unit at that time. Some sources say she's the only one that left the hospital at all that hour on that day. No suspects ever turned up, and because his mother hadn't even known he was there in the first place, and because she'd been under the care of staff at the institution she was in, with her whereabouts for that entire day being known and verified, she wasn't even considered a suspect, nor were any of her or Tavish's other family members. A lawsuit was filed against the hospital, and it resulted in a $600,000 settlement, but no leads were ever found as to what became of Tavish Sutton, who was only 1 month old at the time of his disappearance. The main theory in the beginning was that a woman who would show up at the hospital pretending to be pregnant all the time had somehow abducted him, but this was never proven, and that lady too had an alibi and wasn't able to be considered a suspect in this case. How did an almost newborn baby vanish from such a public place in the matter of a mere 15 minutes? Tavish Sutton has never been found, and there hasn't ever been a single lead or clue as to what happened to him. Well, friends, there you have it. Hospitals are places we go when we're injured to some extent, and we expect to leave them healed and complete. Yet for the people we've discussed here today, and so many others throughout the world, hospitals have been their final destination before passing into the strange world of bizarre and mysterious disappearances. Where did these people go, and what happened to them? How could a person so completely disappear so suddenly and leave behind absolutely no trace at all of what happened to them or where they ended up? Hospitals are very public places that are staffed by thousands of people in some cases. So how does something like this even begin to happen? Those are all great questions, but unfortunately they will most likely forever remain without answers, at least in the majority of these. I look forward to your comments on these cases, but please be friendly and respectful. Till we meet again, be good to yourselves and each other, and I'll see you just a little further on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time. And please, tell your animals I said hi.